Hello, listeners. Welcome to the DataStream podcast, where we talk about ways to leverage data to improve supply chain operations. Today on the show, we have a special guest, Andrea Bortolosso. Andrea was a supply chain and operations leader at Verdigray, Newton Baby, and Things, among others. Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Your profile is really interesting because you've held fairly senior leadership roles in a bunch of different companies across a bunch of different supply chain domains and across a bunch of different supply chain types and markets. Can you tell our listeners a bit about yourself?
I have about, I would say, 20 years of experience in supply chain and operation. I covered different kind of industry, from what is CPG, cosmetic, apparel, beverages, and not just that one, but also different size of companies, from like Fortune 500 to large corporation to very fast pacing and exploding growth startup companies. So I really have witnessed on my skin different kind of supply chain that you would not expect. And similarly, many of them have similar issues and similar problems, but it's very interesting to see how the supply chain can evolve within different corporations, within different companies.
One of the things we talked about extensively is your passion for putting in place systems and processes that improve the way supply chain operations is executed. And one of the systems that is often getting mentioned, and it's used by a lot of different teams, is the ERP. Can you give us a sense of what do different teams use ERPs for?
The enterprise resource planning system is a word that people sometimes they hold as a grail, or another really cannot even pronounce, or really are afraid to speak. The ERP is a fantastic system that should contain a wealth of transactional data, from inventory, order management, customer, financial, supplier, sales data, whatever you want, and could promise the company to do a lot of different things. But you need to understand that a system is as good as the data that is using. I work on the companies that they were eager to implement an ERP because they thought that the ERP was the solution of all their problems. What they sometimes the founder or the operator that wanted to implement the ERP or use the ERP lacks to understand is that if a tool is good, great, but you need to use the tool and you need to use the right data for the tool. Especially because even when implemented, and I work through multiple different ERPs and implement also multiple ERP, and that gave me a lot of nightmares. But even when correctly implemented, the ERP, usually company uses only a fraction of the ERP data capabilities, because getting the right data in the ERP and setting up the right process is a real challenge. Even when the data is accessible, is often riddled with inconsistency, error, missing values, and you have to work with the legacy system that are not integrated with the same one. I can start going on with all the challenges DRP, but I don't know if we want to extend this to a 5 hours podcast.
That's really fascinating, and I think one of the things you rightfully call out is that companies get drawn into an ERP implementation thinking it's the end-all be-all for all of their challenges. And then if you look at the statistics, about 75% of all ERP implementations end up taking at least twice as long and
Absolutely.
out achieving the original goals. What are some of the reasons that companies, kind of miss on these very important projects? These are super expensive, super, resource intensive, time intensive, and very, very impactful for companies. And yet still they consistently miss the mark on the implementation.
Yes.
What are some of the reasons?
So when whenever you implement an ERP system, there is only like an underestimation of what that means and what that system can give you. Of course, the company that will sell you their ERP is, of course, eager to sell the platform and to overpromise in terms of delivery. But there is a lot of requirement in terms of especially time and resources from each individual. Let's say that you implement a new ERP, you need to make sure that each function that is using that ERP has a clear understanding of how the ERP is using in order to embrace the full functionality. And they need to devote a lot of time to setting up the right processes that will be used in the ERP. My old supply chain professor will say that you should only customize your ERP up to probably 15% of that. If you start going more than that, means that it's not the right ERP, and you end up seeing companies that even with the basic supply chain that they require a consulting company or the seller to customize the the platform up to a level that is incredible. Beside that, it also, when you migrate to a new ERP, you have, of course, all the legacy system that all the operators are used to. So there is such a huge amount of change management needed to make sure that whoever is using that ERP can embrace the new function and can understand that sometimes that you were used to do before should not be done in the same way, and there is a reason. So those are just two of things. But of course, data integration, data manipulation, data validation in the new ERP is something that needs to be considered, because technically, as I say, the ERP could do a lot of things, could really give you visibility of a lot of data, but you need to make sure that that kind of complex integration process is done correctly. When you start having different sources, like data quality consistency is not there, uh, you have ERP and you feel like, implementing, using it, it takes way longer because nobody thinks about the data, how to do the data migration from legacy system to the new one that might be in different format.
You mentioned legacy systems, but I want to call out another type of system that's also in the ecosystem of the ERP, which is much more targeted transactional system. So a lot of companies would have a transportation management system that's
Yes.
dedicated just for the logistics side of the house. And those aren't usually inherited by the ERP, even for larger ERP integrations, because they're best of breed for what it is that they do. And the integration challenges that you mentioned aren't just with moving data from legacy systems. It's also making sure that the different transactional systems talk back into the ERP and they're in sync. And in a lot of cases, I think those transactional systems are there because there's this particular function in the organization that needs it. A TMS in the case of transportation, an MES in the case of production. What, in your experience, which teams usually end up working primarily on the ERP, and which teams end up using another system as their, let's call it, their main tool of their everyday trade?
So what I can tell you is that nowadays a lot of ERP systems, not all of them, are trying to expand all those functions that are used by, what you mentioned, that the TMS can be the MRP, it can be the CRM, all those different platform. Only because they understood that of course, especially a smaller company, they don't have the capability to have a standalone system
Mhm.
for those functions. But there is a reason why, especially big corporation, that they have the funds and resources to do that, decide to use an ERP only for supply planning, or not even demand planning sometimes, just for supply planning, because the core capabilities of that ERP is indeed to do that. You might want to use, I'm not going to start naming, of course, different platform, but might want to use for the CRM, a very famous solution, PMS another one, or WMS another one. But as you said, once you understand that, the off-the-shelf version of ERP performs very well on just that portion on like the supply planning that the supply team can have, and maybe the finance team, because of course the finance team like can have, but the logistic team prefer to start using the TMS or the customer support that they have the CRM. The data integration is the real challenge because of course those big companies, they are now working together to making sure that there are the solution. There you have basically this middleware that start like operating as like cross link between the two different platform, and even for them is very hard. You've seen at least in the landscape of platform the past 20 years, more and more platform that the only job is to basically helping this platform to connect together. And thanks God, because finally we can have the two systems working together, two, three, four, five systems working together as they should, but we don't know how to communicate. Like I've done communicate, it looks like they talk different languages.
When you have multiple systems that are connected together, only some pieces of the data end up getting transported between the transactional systems of record.
Yes.
And we see two primary reasons why that's the case. One reason is because there was some scope for the initial implementation, and that's the scope of information that got transitioned from one system into another. And because implementations are so complex, rarely do people go back and start adding additional fields. But the second pattern that we see is that different systems aren't built to hold the entire complexity of the business objects from another system. So if you look at a shipment object with all of its wealth of information, including its life cycle, its booking, bills of lading, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, an ERP doesn't really have the data model, the functionality, the systems to support all of that information. And so it's always an exercise in reductionism of what are the primary data points that you need to transfer. And sometimes there's a person in the way making those reductions and doing those manual downloads and uploads. I guess people as an API. In your experience, what do teams do to overcome this, plurality of systems that they need to access on an everyday basis?
I actually experienced this myself in my team in my prior role, where we were shocked by the fact that our current ERP was not supporting some very basic data element that we thought that for purchasing or for data ordering was really a basic requirement. And we work a lot with software engineer to understand how much we could customize our own ERP, but it's not an easy job. It takes a long time. And again, as I said before, you should not spend that much time to customize your ERP, because when you're gonna upgrade to the next version, then you're gonna have to start all over. Unfortunately, what they've seen happening is that people keep using Excel as a tool, as a repository tool. And when you inquire why, is because they mentioned that the ERP does not have the capability, or even better, they don't know how to migrate that data from the PIM into the ERP. And they feel frustrated. They feel that it's not their job. And I agree with them. It's not their job. So they end up basically using as a repository, an Excel spreadsheet, and that is the end of the game. But you can imagine how not very productive that whole process is. So it's definitely a big challenge.
I jokingly say is that the most common IT system in supply chain is probably Microsoft Excel.
Absolutely, absolutely. Not just a small corporation. I can tell you, even a huge one. Yes.
I've spoken to a supply chain leader in one of the biggest electronics companies, consumer electronics companies in the world, and he told me we pride ourselves on being an Excel-driven company. And one of the reasons when I asked him why that's the case, this is a multi-billion-dollar supply chain running on Excel, basically. He said Excel is the only tool that was flexible enough to handle our supply chain and all the changes that happened to it over time.
Yes.
He said they tried implementing every large IT system, ERPs, WMSs, all the three-letter acronyms, and nothing was as flexible as Excel. And so they always end up going back to Excel for almost everything.
It's also, Amir, is also easy to use. I mean, you can see how nowadays a lot of companies are using BI tools so that via SQL, via different kind of data warehouse can perform similar things. But there is this kind of resistance in embracing the tool, in learning the tool, that nowadays everybody knows how to use Excel. You start doing pivot table, you start doing macros. It's now that hard, and gives you that kind of flexibility, that kind of power enough to manipulate a large set of data. And it works great for the need of most of the companies. So you don't need to do it, but it's not, of course, productive as it could be. Or let me rephrase it: it doesn't allow you to go that further, that deeper as other tool can do it. More sophisticated tool doesn't allow you to do predictive analysis, doesn't allow you to do data mining. Those things you cannot do it in Excel.
Excel does a wonderful job at data manipulation and data analysis, but it doesn't let you do things like historical analysis, future predictions, like you said, and it doesn't give you the ability to collect the data effectively from all of these different systems. At the end of the day,
Absolutely.
for most companies, if you use Excel as your analysis tool, supply chain operators are pretty good using Excel,
They
but
learn to, yes.
yeah, but the challenge is how do you get the worksheet with the information that you need with that you can actually trust? And that's one of the things we actually do a lot of at Unity. I wanted to ask you, and maybe it's a good segue into a different topic, given the mix of systems and tools and where all the information resides, how do supply chain executives such as yourself in different industries go about compiling the reporting and analytics and the insights and the KPIs that they need to run the business? It sounds incredibly complicated.
It is, because again, it goes back on what is the source of your data. It would be ideal if all the source of data would be in just one single place, like in an ERP, but it's not. You are literally to chase your data around different kind of sources. And once you find that data, you need to collect the data, clean the data, format the data, manipulate the data, and bring it back to the same source, because or the same data repository, because of course you want to combine the data. You don't want to just look at your POs and somewhere else in your inventory. You want that data combined. So that is definitely a challenge. I know that myself and my team spend endless amount of hours, and night, trying to get this data together and trying to fund it, because the different sources that you have are not so easy to extract this data. You talk about a supplier portal or system from the MRP or the warehouse portal, that you have the WMS or TMS. So you have the different logistic portals. You have when you talk about customer data, these different sources that formatted in a different way is very hard to combine. And once you have this data, you can start creating report, but for the same reason, like in the ERP, that is where all the data should be. That the capability in terms of reporting of the ERP is there, but it's not used as much as it should. That's why companies start using BI tools. Why doing it? Why you can use the ERP? Because the ERP is not that great. Fantastic. Let's use the BI tools, but also the BI tools is not so user friendly. It's not so easy to use. And what happened is that a lot of executives end up not doing that kind of report. I had to learn how to use the different BI tools, but it took time, and a lot of data. But I can imagine that a lot of other executives, they just want to see a couple of report, a couple of metrics, a couple of KPIs. That is for them the important key element to run the business. And they don't want to spend like endless amount of time creating that report, whether it's in an ERP that cannot do it, or in a BI tool, or like extracting the data, or asking the analytics team to do it. So that is definitely a big challenge.
How similar are the KPIs and metrics and reports that different executives use in different industries? There's a lot of different, there's been a lot of work done in the industry to try and standardize things. There's obviously the SCORE framework and other frameworks. But how similar is it really? Every company seems to think they're a unique snowflake with the challenges and the things they measure. How true is that? How unique are they?
I can tell you that the score method can go pretty deep in what to show you, but not so many companies are actually using the score. The kind of a metrics like from financial metrics can be cost of goods, can be like cash to cash cycle time, or the classic operational metric like inventory turnover, lead time, the order fulfillment cycle time, like all those metrics. I can guarantee you that every executive or senior leadership wants to have that. Now, sure, you can go even down deeper, but even when I was leading the supply division, like, at P&G, the metrics that we have were pretty standard. If we're talking about the material management, if we start talking like, the manufacturing, maybe there are some metrics that are more detailed than others, but I can tell you that, a couple of dozen of metrics are covering like, I would say 80% of the needs of the executive, especially if we talk about executive, not the operators that need to run the machinery and need to check the talk time or on the idle time or anything like that.
I think we're experiencing something really interesting about the industry where the metrics, the top level metrics are the same, but the way you collect the information that's required to calculate them is drastically different based on what the IT landscape looks like in individual companies. Because one company may have achieved the holy grail and funneled all of this information into the ERP, and maybe the ERP calculates some of these metrics
Yes.
automatically, but probably for the most part, for a lot of other companies, bits and pieces of those calculations exist in different systems, in different spreadsheets, in different departments. And we hear very often from executives about the challenge of getting getting reporting, getting analytics, getting insights on a continuous basis rather than once a month, maybe once a quarter even. People talk about, can we generate, you talked about suppliers, about supplier portals and supplier scorecards. Can we measure our suppliers' performance on a continuous basis rather
Yes.
than once a quarter when we do the QBR with them?
The reason is, Amir, because this is not automated. For every executive that is asking for a new report, there's like, probably a team of analysts that is screaming at night, why do I need to do that? That is taking time. When you start having sources that have data incompatibility issue, when you need to manipulate that data, when it takes so much time, every kind of report is really a big resource bottleneck, where like from the executive standpoint that doesn't have the understanding sometimes of what it means, gathering that data, putting it together and spit it out in a readable report. There is this kind of a contrast with the analytic teams or whoever the operator that is doing that. If we can automate that process, if we can make sure that the analytics team doesn't spend endless man hours like in doing this, or rather focus in doing the real job, the analytic team, that will be so much better for the entire organization, and at the same time provide the visibility of the leadership of the report that they need to have to run the company.
You mentioned data quality. How big of a challenge is data quality in this process?
It is big because when you talk about the data quality, you talk about that data inconsistency and also the pure data quality. You're extracting data from a source that might be in different format that you need to do the data validation. It's not as simple as like, extracting the data and put it in another like system. So you very often add that that data that you're extracting is, as I said, inconsistent. It doesn't make sense, or there it is not at the level like you want it. So you cannot just put it back like where it's supposed to be, but you need to make sure that you're doing this kind of a validation. Otherwise, of course, garbage in, garbage out. It is not what they exactly want, and like is not what like a reliable report should give you. So that is also a part that in the past I've seen takes a lot of time, because you can get the data doesn't make any sense. You need to understand why quality is such a big challenge, why you cannot extract the data in the right way. You need to investigate, you need to have people that, of course, are expertise in what they're doing. And it's not just a matter of the system that can extract the data. The system, however, can be a person, can be a system, can be AI, needs to extract the data and understand if that data is correct. The quality of that data is what is supposed to be.
I completely agree with you. One of the things I wanted to add to that is that without quality, there's no trust from the users. And more than that, the users, without knowing what parts of the information they can trust, they just stop trusting the system as a whole.
The whole source, yes.
And then either they spend a lot of time double checking every piece of information because they don't trust it, or when it comes to insights or predictions, they just disregard it completely because they can't trust the outcome because the underlying data might not be in the right quality.
I would say recently when I had the problem where we needed to extract some data from a carrier through like a tracking system, and we were seeing inconsistency in part of the data. It was about 15% of data. Now, even 5% or 3% is enough for me to not want to use that data and to say, okay, we cannot trust any of this data because, of course, you don't know where that 15% could input. You cannot set up the process. So, and that took like an enormous amount of time to understand where is the data wrong, how can I trust the data, but that was our only source for that kind of information. So we need to have that data somehow in the system.
The quality of the data in a lot of cases is a given, right? It's almost a part of the physics of the world.
Yes.
Working with a carrier and that's the only source of the data, it might be 5% wrong, and there's nothing you can do about that. It's always going to be 5% wrong. One of our customers recently said, he said, I get it. It's okay that it's 5% wrong. I just need you to tell me which 5%, because I just need to know what not to trust. And that was a big part that informed the way we built our data quality tools, which is you need to accept that there is data quality issues and focus on making sure the user understands what can they and can't they trust. So one, you foster the trust in the system as a whole by telling them where they can put their trust and where they shouldn't, but also it gives the user a path forward without just throwing your hands up in the air and saying, well, we just don't know, right? That you can say, okay, this data you can trust, you can make decisions, you can calculate your KPIs, you report on it, you can move on with your business, but this other 5% just don't use it.
Yeah, especially because Amir, when you're trying to get data from a source, it's not just a single information. It's not just a single point of data. You're talking about a lot of different information. So it might be just one single kind of data is wrong. Still, the rest, the 90%, 95, whatever you have, is still valuable data that you
Right.
should get. You can use it, you can build process, you can build your model around. But if you don't know where, you cannot do anything. If you can at least identify where your data is wrong, fantastic. You can still use that source.
100%. One of the areas which are most impacted by data quality, and has been kind of a hot topic in our industry for a while now, is everything around predictive analytics. What's your take on how predictive analytics are getting incorporated into actual workflows in supply chain?
It would be very useful. It's fantastic for any supply chain leader, or like any kind of operation leader. Like the predictive analytics uses historical data and statistic algorithms to forecast what are the future events and the trend. But of course, it's not that easy, because one of the biggest element is having the right data, or having even enough data. I know that there are a lot of tools out there that can do that, more sophisticated tool, but some of those that are the scam. So basically, those tools, those systems, they do real-time monitoring and event alerting, and that can also provide you also some part of predictive analytics. Those are already a big upgrade for the companies. Now, if you want to go even further using AI to do true predictive forecasting, true predictive analytics, that will give an advantage, huge advantage to many companies. But it's not so easy to do, at least with the regular ERP as you want it. I can guarantee you that, if I could get a nickel, or a dime for any time my CEO was asking me, what would happen if this container would not be here on time? What would happen if our sales would increase 200% of that, on that time, on that window? I really would be rich. That is a question that any executive would love to have. That kind of tool would be definitely something that is so powerful to make an informed strategic decision, that I would love to have that capability in any ERP or in any system that I could use.
And I think you hit the nail on the head, which is the more sophisticated the algorithm, the more it is dependent on the quality of the underlying
Hmm.
data, because statistical algorithms are notorious for being the most garbage in, garbage out thing in
Absolutely, yes.
pretty much. Obviously, predictive analytics is key and the value is enormous. How do you see the the landscape changing? What would be the impact for companies who aren't going to leverage?
I think that it would be fantastic for the company to start using the tools, because they can start implementing the risk diversification strategies within their own supply chain. The reason why operators are not doing this, or have been kind of slow in doing this, is because they don't have the right tool. If you give a supply operator the capability of understanding what are the different what if scenarios, and how that supply chain will be different, how will be impacted by these different scenarios, of course, they can be put in place different plan to mitigate the risk. We know that the chances of having a disruption in that specific part of the supply chain is very high. What is the risk? What is the real impact? Is it really that bad? If it is, what can I do? When you start playing and calculate all the different possibilities, that give power to the supply chain operator to implement all these plans that otherwise they would not be able to calculate.
We talked about everything from what information exists in ERPs and in other systems, all the way to how that information can be used for predictions and more advanced analytics coming up. How do you see the IT landscape for supply chain technology changing over the next 5 or 10 years?
from an IT standpoint, a lot of new platform related to digital supply chain. And what I mean is that there is this increased need of visibility, and not just visibility, but also to have different systems connected and get the real data. Because when you start having real data in your system, then you can start shifting, like, a different planning strategy. You can go from forecast based to demand based planning. You can have a different visibility. You can react quickly. The bullwhip effect, everybody knows that, is having the right data and at the right time is the key element. But before, it was not so easy to do it. Now, with this digital transformation that we have, when we have finally this system that they can connect with each other and talk to each other, and you can see that data, that allows the company to be more reactive and even more proactive. So that is changing a lot and is helping the company, like, really going through, the different kind of disruption in the supply chain in a better way that they could have handled before.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I think our listeners learned a ton about how the IT landscape is changing, what they can do to make better use and get more value out of their existing systems. And I think most importantly is what's their path into a future where they get more, both out of their systems and out of the underlying data, and how to make good use of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure to chat with you about all this, and great work.
The pleasure is all ours.